So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this seminar. It's a blustery and wet Friday afternoon, so no better place to be, I would suggest. And we still have some people joining, but we have a good spread of people from, I think, around the country. It's easier to turn up to these events than face the weather of a Friday afternoon. So my name is John Curtis. I'm head of the economics division here at the ESRI, and I'm going to be the MC, I suppose, for this afternoon's event. And the research or the report that we have published today is part of a joint research program between the ESRI and the Shared Island Unit of the Department of the Taoiseach. And this research program, the purpose of it is to, or the title of it, first of all, is the Economic and Social Opportunities from Increased Cooperation on a Shared Island. And the purpose basically is to add knowledge and information across a variety of subjects across the sort of economic and social sphere to inform public discussion and debate. And we've undertaken research or published research reports on topics such as health, education, trade, labour markets, housing, and today we publish our latest report. Before we get into the report itself and the presentation, I'd like to just a few short thank yous. First to the Shared Island Unit within the Department of the Taoiseach, for the funding for this research, which we're very grateful to have and to undertake this important work. And then the report you can see today, it's guided or helped along by a steering group comprising officials from the Department of the Taoiseach and also some external experts, and the authors really appreciate the input from that group. So before I hand over to the authors, just to remind you what the plan of action is for the next hour and a half or so, I'm going to call on Karina Durley, one of the authors, to present an outline of the report first, and we'll immediately follow that with a Q&A session where her co-authors, Michaela and Dora, will also join in helping answer the questions. And then subsequent to that, and hopefully we'll have a vibrant Q&A session, we have some panelists on who I'll introduce later just to widen out the discussion. So at this point then, I'm going to ask Karina to present an overview of the report.
Thanks a million, John. Hopefully you can all hear me. I'm just going to share my slides now. Can you see that?
I can see the slides, yes.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so today I'm going to present to you the drivers of income inequality in Ireland and Northern Ireland. And as John mentioned, this is co-authored with Michele Gobello and Dora Tuda from the ESRI. So the starting point from this, I suppose, is that we know that incomes are higher in Ireland on average than in Northern Ireland. So we estimate that incomes are approximately 50% higher in Ireland compared to Northern Ireland in 2019. But the distribution of that income also differs, okay? So not only is the average level different, but the distribution differs. So we know that there are historically higher poverty rates in Northern Ireland than there are in Ireland. And up until 2019, there were also historically lower income inequality rates in Northern Ireland compared to Ireland. So that meant that the dispersion of income in Northern Ireland was lower than the dispersion of income in Ireland, although that difference seemed to close in the recent period in 2019 and 2020. And there's very little evidence on the reasons either for the differences in income inequality in Ireland and Northern Ireland, or indeed the reasons for this difference disappearing in recent years. And there's a whole range of literature on differences in income inequality, either between countries or over time, or even within regions in a particular country. And they tend to identify three sets of reasons why income inequality differs, either over time or between countries. So the first is demographics. So in particular here, I'm thinking about education and age. So the demographic structure of a country can shape the distribution of its income. If you think about a very highly educated population, the employment rate is likely to be higher, or particularly a population that is older on average, the employment rate is likely to be lower because we'll have more old age pensioners. So these sort of demographic, sort of structural facets of the population can shape income distribution. There are also lots of reasons for differences in income inequality that relate to the labour market. So the different employment rate between countries or over time that maybe corresponds to the business cycle, or to different employment structures within countries can contribute to income inequality, but also the wage structure. So how people are rewarded for their labour market characteristics. Is that very dispersed, or is there quite a tight wage structure? And then the final reason that income inequality tends to differ between countries or over time is the tax benefit system. So the tax benefit system, which forms market income into take-home income, so either by levying taxes or awarding benefits, redistributes between rich and poor, and that obviously has a massive impact on income distribution. So why should we care about income inequality? And here in particular, why should we care about how it differs between Ireland and Northern Ireland? So since the financial crisis, the topic of income inequality has become quite, I suppose it's quite in vogue since the crisis, and it's very important in political and public debates today. So there are a couple of economic reasons why we would be concerned about the level of income inequality. So it's widely accepted that too much income inequality can harm economic growth. And there's also a lot of evidence to suggest that it affects social cohesion and even individual well-being. So people are concerned about their relative level of income as well as their absolute level of income. So as well as worrying about how much they can consume with their income, they also consider how much they have compared to their peers, or to either in their neighborhood or people that they consider to be like them. So a very wide income distribution where there's a lot of inequality can be detrimental to social cohesion and to individual well-being. Some even point to its effect on political stability and the rise of populism. So there's a growing view that too much income inequality can lead to a sort of them versus us type of mindset in a country, and contribute to support for political parties that might be considered to be very extreme. And importantly, how people perceive income inequality varies depending on whether they think it's fair or not. So if you take some examples here, so if you consider somebody at the beginning of their career versus somebody at the end of their career, they might have the same qualifications, but because the person at the end of their career, the older person, has more labour market experience, they will have a higher wage than the younger person who is just starting out. So that is an inequality in income, but it wouldn't typically be construed as unfair. If you take, for example, a man and a woman doing the same job with the same qualifications and experience, we know that on average, the man is going to be paid more than the woman because we have a gender wage gap. So that is an inequality that's typically considered to be unfair. So really the source of income inequality affects how well it is accepted in society. And if we understand what's driving income inequality in a particular country, it helps us see if this is something that is acceptable or if it's something that policymakers should worry about. So there's a lot of research that has pointed to reasons why income inequality might differ between Ireland and Northern Ireland, just due to differences between the two jurisdictions. And a lot of that research has actually come about because of the joint research programme between the Shared Island Unit and the ESRI. So we know that productivity and wages are higher in Ireland than they are in Northern Ireland. So that's certainly going to shape the distribution of income in both countries. Public sector employment is also much more prevalent in Northern Ireland than it is in Ireland. And as public sector pay tends to be capped at a lower level than private sector pay, that will compress the income distribution and result in lower income inequality. Education levels are also higher in Ireland, and significantly so, as I'll show you in a couple of minutes. And that results in more people being in work and them earning higher wages. The population of Northern Ireland is older on average than the population of Ireland. So Northern Ireland is a little bit further ahead than Ireland in the population aging story. We also know that mothers of young children work longer hours in Ireland. compared to Northern Ireland. So this will contribute to an increase in the number of dual earner households in Ireland compared to Northern Ireland. And lastly, tax benefit systems in Ireland and the UK contribute differently to income inequality. So there's evidence, we don't have any recent evidence per se on the difference between the tax benefit system in Ireland and Northern Ireland, but there is evidence from before the financial crisis that indicates that the Irish tax benefit system redistributes more than the UK tax benefit system. So in this research, we investigate the drivers of income inequality in Ireland and Northern Ireland. So we start by estimating the difference in income inequality using the Gini index. So the Gini index is a really widely used measure of income inequality. It's not without its flaws, but it is very widely used. So we do focus on that. And the Gini index, it ranges between 0 and 1. 0 would be perfect equality, where everybody has exactly the same income, and 1 would be perfect inequality, where one person holds all of the income. So the lower the Gini index, the more equally income is distributed. So we actually find that the difference in the Gini index between Ireland and Northern Ireland is not statistically different from 0. So income inequality is actually very similar in the two jurisdictions. But despite this, because a similar aggregate income inequality could be masking different underlying forces, we proceed to show how different factors in the population structure and in the tax benefit system shape income distribution in each jurisdiction to see whether this sort of aggregate similar income inequality is masking underlying differences. So we focus on two separate factors. We first look at market income factors. So those are demographics, wages, and the employment structure. Those are the three main sort of areas we focus on here. And we focus on these because those are the areas where most of the literature to date suggests that there are differences between Ireland and Northern Ireland. And then we focus on differences in the tax benefit system, and we split that up into its various components. So tax, social security, means tested benefits, and non-means tested benefits. And to do this, we use two microsimulation models, so Switch for Ireland and the Northern Ireland module of UKMOD. So a microsimulation model is simply a tax benefit calculator that codes all of the policy rules for a particular year for a particular country and is linked to survey data for that country. And running the tax benefit model or the microsimulation model tells you for a particular population, for a representative sample of the population, what each household should pay in tax and what how much they should receive in benefits based on the rules of the tax and welfare system and the underlying characteristics of the households. So Switch is linked to the Survey of Income and Living Conditions Research Microdata File, and UKMOD is linked to the Family Resources Survey in the UK. And importantly, the two models are harmonised. So they're both based on the EuroMOD platform. EuroMOD is the European Commission's harmonised tax and welfare model. And Switch and UKMOD both make use of that platform, which makes it really easy to do sort of comparative work with them because they are harmonised. So they simulate the taxes, social security, means tested benefits, and non-means tested benefits, and then ultimately disposable income of a representative sample of households from each country. And pensions are mostly not simulated. They are in the data and we do account for them when we're calculating disposable income, but they are not simulated because survey data typically doesn't have enough information on contribution histories to know whether somebody should be eligible for a particular level of pension or not. And lastly, we focus on 2019. There's a number of reasons for that. I suppose the major reason is that was at the time we wrote this was the latest harmonised year for both models. But there are also other reasons, including the fact that it was the sort of last year pre-pandemic. We know that income distribution may have changed quite considerably since the pandemic, and it would be really good to follow this up with study of how our results might have changed since the pandemic. So I just want to quickly show you the modelling framework. So you can sort of understand how we go about this work. So starting with our survey data contains a representative sample of the population, and we know for each household, we know their demographic structure, how many children are there, what age everybody is, if they're working, how much they're earning, etc. So underlying that survey data, there is an implicit structure. So there are a certain proportion of people of a certain age, there is a certain proportion of people with different education characteristics, there's a proportion of people in work, a proportion of people who are not in work or in employment, and then there is a wage structure. So that's sort of the implicit structure of the underlying survey data set, which represents the population. And from that survey data set, we can calculate market income. So market income is household level market income. It is earnings plus investment income plus private pensions. And then we can calculate the inequality of that household level market income. And for this, we use the Gini index. So what we do in this work is we take the underlying structure of the survey data set, and we take, for example, the Northern Ireland data set, and we swap one by one the structures, the underlying structure of that data set to make it look more similar to the Irish data set. So we take for example, we take the wage structure, right? So we have a particular wage structure underlying the Northern Irish survey data set. We change that so that people are compensated for their wages, not as if they were working in Northern Ireland, but as if they were in Ireland. So they get the wage level that they would get if they were living in Ireland based on their labour market characteristics. And we do that swap one by one for the three demographic factors, so wages, employment structure, and demographics. And then we do it all together as well. And so, for example, when we do the wage swap, we recalculate market income and we recalculate market income inequality. And the difference between that calculation and our baseline level of market income inequality tells us how much the wage structure of Ireland contributes to income inequality. Okay, and we get that number separately for employment structure and for demographics, and then all together. The second stage of our analysis involves the tax and welfare system. So not only do we want to look at the underlying population structure, we also want to look at how market income is transformed into disposable income. So market income is linked to our microsimulation model, Switch and UKMOD, which calculate for each household the tax they should pay, their social security liability, and the benefits that they should receive. That gives us disposable income, which is market income minus tax and social security plus benefits and pensions. And then we can calculate disposable income inequality, which is the inequality of take-home income after tax and transfers. So again, what we do is swap one by one each of the aspects of the tax and welfare system. So we start by saying, what would the disposable income distribution look like if instead of the Northern Irish tax system, we implement the Irish tax system in Northern Ireland. We do that separately for each component of the tax and welfare system, and the differences in the disposable income distribution that we calculate tell us how much the tax or the benefit system is contributing to income inequality. So let me start just by showing you some summary statistics from the two data sets. So if we look at the top panel, this is for individuals who are aged over 18. You can see that the population of Northern Ireland is slightly older than the population of Ireland. But the difference that really stands out here is the education difference. So the Irish population, or the population in Ireland, 47% have tertiary education compared to 23% in Northern Ireland. So that's quite a stark difference, and that's really going to affect income inequality. Hours worked in Ireland are slightly higher than they are in Northern Ireland, and the hourly wage is quite a bit higher than it is in Northern Ireland. So it's €22.64 on average compared to €14.84. If we were to adjust that Northern Irish hourly wage level for purchasing power parity, it would be €16 per hour. So a little bit closer to the Irish wage level, but still quite a bit off. Looking at the next panel, this gives us the components of disposable income. It's at the household level and it's monthly. So average market income is €4,500 per month in Ireland, and in Northern Ireland, it's €3,000 on average per month. So the Irish market income value is about 50% higher than the Northern Irish market income value, which is quite a large difference, even not adjusted for purchasing power parity. Looking at the tax, average tax liabilities next. The Irish tax liability is on average close to €1,000, whereas the Northern Irish average tax liability is close to €350. So while the Irish tax liability is higher than the Northern Irish one, it is relatively higher compared to the difference in market income. So it's almost 3 times as high as it is in Northern Ireland, whereas the market income difference is just 50%. Employee social insurance contributions are also higher in Ireland compared to Northern Ireland, but that difference is actually more in line with the difference in market income. If we look down to means tested benefits there, that's where you see the difference in reverse. So the means tested benefit system in results in an average monthly means tested benefit of around €200 per month in Northern Ireland compared to 166 in Ireland. So the means tested benefit system, more generous or higher coverage in Northern Ireland compared to Ireland, or indeed both. And I'll show you some more data on that a little bit later. The non-means tested benefit system is slightly more generous in Ireland than in Northern Ireland. And so that gives us disposable income, which is market income minus tax and social security plus benefits, which is €4,000 on average in Ireland compared to almost 3,200 in Northern Ireland. So the difference in disposable income between the two countries is much less than the difference in market income, which tells you that the tax benefit system is doing quite a bit of redistribution to close that gap. Okay, so then looking at the last panel, this gives us some inequality indices. So we first start with the Gini of market income. So you remember that high Gini indicates more income inequality. So this is inequality of income before the tax and transfer system is applied. And that's 0.51 in Ireland and 0.49 in Northern Ireland. So a little bit lower in Northern Ireland, but that difference actually isn't statistically different. So from zero. So those are essentially the same. Similar market income inequality in Ireland and Northern Ireland. The same is true for disposable income inequality. So that the difference between 0.28 and 0.26 is not statistically different from zero. So similar inequality in disposable income as measured by the Gini index between the two jurisdictions as well. Where we do have a difference is in the Gini of hourly wages. So inequality in hourly wages is significantly higher in Ireland than in Northern Ireland. So a much higher hourly wage dispersion. And then if we look at the 90-50 ratio, which measures inequality between the top and the middle income households, that is pretty similar in the two countries, as is the 50-10 ratio, which measures inequality between the middle and lowest income deciles. So this is just a look at the income distributions in Northern Ireland and Ireland. So on the y-axis, we have monthly income in euros, and on the x-axis, I've divided households into equally sized groups, ranging from the lowest income decile to the highest income decile, up here at 10. And the blue line shows the distribution of market income. So low or zero down at the very bottom of the income distribution. So the lowest tenth of the population in Ireland and Northern Ireland have zero market income. So these are probably pensioners or people dependent on welfare. And then as we move up the income distribution, market income increases significantly so in Ireland in the 9th and 10th deciles. The disposable income distribution is the red dotted line. So this indicates the after taxes and transfers, what is the distribution of income throughout these deciles. And you'll see that in Ireland, that is higher than the market income line up to about decile 6. So that means that up to about decile 6, households in Ireland are on average net beneficiaries from the tax benefit system. So they receive more in welfare than they pay in tax. And after that point, they become net contributors to the tax benefit system. So they pay more in tax than they receive in benefits. That switching point is higher up the income distribution in Northern Ireland. So up to about decile 8, households are net beneficiaries from the tax benefit system. And after that, they become net contributors. So just to recap, first of all, we're going to explore the drivers of market income inequality by simulating the employment structure, wages, and demographic profile of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And we do this in parts. We do it one at a time, and then we'll do it all together because there are interaction effects between these three factors. And then we re-estimate market income inequality with these counterfactual population structures. And the change from our baseline tells us the contribution of each component to the difference in market income inequality between Ireland and Northern Ireland. So the line at the top here tells us the baseline level of market income inequality in Northern Ireland. So that's about 0.49. If we swap the Northern Irish demographics to look more like the Irish structure of education and age by gender, we get a slight decrease in income inequality. So it goes down to about 4.45. If we swap the employment structure in Northern Ireland to look more like the Irish employment structure, the Gini index would also go down slightly to about 0.47. And if we were to swap the wage structure, the Gini coefficient would go up to about 0.53. Okay, so the demographic structure of Ireland is inequality decreasing compared to the Northern Irish demographic structure. The same is true of the employment status structure to a lesser extent, while the wage structure is inequality increasing. And if we take all of these all together, we see a small increase in income inequality, but one that's not statistically significant. Looking at the individual changes of demographics, employment, and wages, you'll see that the confidence intervals represented by the line through the dot, they slightly overlap with the baseline, which means that those differences aren't statistically different from zero at the 5% level. But when we recalculate these with 90% confidence intervals, it turns out they are statistically significant at the 10% level. So just slightly less confident in these estimates than we would like to be at the 95% level. So we find that market income inequality is similar in Ireland and Northern Ireland, but this masks opposing effects. So the age and education profile by gender in Ireland is inequality reducing, and this is due to the relatively lower number of people with no earnings. So if you increase the proportion of the population with high education and you decrease the proportion of the population that is of retirement age, so you implement a relatively younger population, you have fewer people who have no earnings in the population, and that reduces income inequality because there are fewer people at the very bottom end of the income distribution at that mass at zero earnings. We find that the returns to labour market characteristics are inequality increasing in Ireland, so that wage difference is actually inequality increasing, and we sort of speculate, I suppose, that this could be due to the productivity gap that's well documented between the two countries, but maybe also to sectoral differences. There are different job profiles between the two countries, so it could be something like that. So the next thing we do is estimate the effect of the tax benefit system on disposable income inequality. So to do that, we estimate a detailed econometric relationship between all of the components of the tax benefit system and household income and characteristics based on our microsimulations from the two models from 2019. And then we're going to swap them sequentially and all together and estimate the effect of for example, the Irish tax system on Northern Irish income inequality. So again, this is just to show you the distribution of market and disposable income in the two jurisdictions. The difference between the red and the blue line shows you the intervention of the tax and welfare system. And if we split that difference out into the various components, you get something that looks like this. So if you look, for example, at the red line, that is the means tested benefit system. And you'll see that that's maybe slightly higher at the very bottom of the distribution in Ireland. But actually, if you look at the Northern Irish line, it continues for much longer above zero than it does in Ireland. So that tells you that the generosity of the means tested benefit system is higher in the middle of the income distribution in Northern Ireland, but also that the coverage is higher. So more households, relatively speaking, are benefiting from it. The other line that stands out here is the tax line. So you can see it's the black dotted line. So households in Ireland paying tax at an earlier stage in the income distribution and also paying significantly more in the top income deciles in decile 9 and 10. So then what happens if we swap the tax and welfare system in Ireland and Northern Ireland? So the baseline disposable income inequality measure is 0.27 here. When we swap the Northern Irish tax system for the Irish tax system, we get a decrease in income inequality. So it reduces down to about 0.25. If instead of that, we were to swap the means tested benefit system, so implement the Irish means tested benefit system in Northern Ireland, we will get a slight increase in income inequality up to 0.28. And if we were to change the other parts of the income of the tax benefit system, we'd get very little change. So it's really the tax system and the means tested benefit system that result in different income inequality in Northern Ireland. If we implement all of the changes together, you get a very small increase in income inequality, but it's not statistically significant. And again, you'll see that the line going through the tax dot and the line going through the means tested benefit dot are overlapping with our baseline income line. So that means that they're not statistically different or different from it at 5% level. The tax line is at the 10% level, but the means tested benefit change is not. Okay, and this just shows what portion of the income distribution the swap would impact. So if you look at, for example, at the income tax graph on the top left, the blue line shows the baseline, so that's the Northern Irish income tax system, and the red line shows the counterfactual if you implement the Irish tax system. So you see households paying more tax particularly at top income deciles. The means tested benefit system just below that, you can see that if we implement the Irish means tested benefit system in Northern Ireland, households at the lower end of the income distribution receive less in means tested benefits than otherwise, and maybe there's a slight increase further up the distribution. Okay, so we find that the Irish tax system would decrease income inequality if it was implemented in Northern Ireland, and that's because it's more progressive, so it redistributes more between high income households and middle income households. And this would be counteracted by the effect of the Irish means tested benefits, which are withdrawn sooner in the income distribution than the Northern Irish means tested benefit system. Swapping other parts of the tax benefit system wouldn't have much of an effect on income inequality, at least. And the result of implementing the entire Irish tax benefit system in Northern Ireland would be reasonably similar income inequality to what we observe at the moment, thanks to these two opposing forces. Okay, we've done some robustness checks. I'm going to skip this. Happy to take questions at the end. Just to wrap up, we find that income inequality is similar in Ireland and Northern Ireland, but this similarity masks differences in the factors underlying income distribution in both jurisdictions. So we have population differences contributing to differences in inequality of market income. So in particular, the wage structure in Ireland increases income inequality, and differences in the age and education structure in Ireland decrease income inequality compared to Northern Ireland. But some of the difference is also due to the tax benefit system. So the Irish system of means tested benefits redistributes less than the Northern Irish system, but this is partly counteracted by the Irish tax system, which redistributes more. Two thoughts that I'll maybe just leave you with. So the current trends in most developed countries of population aging and upskilling are likely to substantially affect income inequality in both jurisdictions in the future. So we've seen that population aging and increasing education can affect significantly the distribution of income. And because Northern Ireland is starting from a lower base in terms of education, that could be particularly important there. And then finally, we find that any harmonisation of the tax benefit system between the two jurisdictions in the kind of spirit of increased cooperation on the island of Ireland would actually have a limited impact on income inequality, though of course it would affect the level of income, but in terms of the distribution of income, it might not have a very large effect. Okay, and I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karina. For some reason my video won't start, but we can keep talking. So we have a very big attendance, so I'm hoping I'm a man and I can't multitask with the video, but it won't go on. But I'll try and get the first question in. So we have a good few, well over 125, nearly 130 participants, so would expect a lively Q&A session. We already have one in on the Q&A function, which should generally be on the bottom of your screen if you want to type it in there, and I will relay them and ask Karina, Michaela, or Dora to try and answer. So the first question is related to, you've talked about different education levels and different ways of breaking out the population by socio-demographics. So there's someone asking whether the research modeled whether there's an ethnicity identifier in the survey, and they're particularly asking about travellers and Roma, but maybe other categories if anybody wants to take that, and whether you've looked into it or is it something for the future.
Am I okay to take that? So no, the short answer is no. We weren't looking at ethnic status, and a simple answer is just that we wouldn't have enough observations. So basically, when we split the data in terms of gender and then age brackets, and then on top of that education, these cells tend to become very, very small. So if we were to add ethnic status in some of these cells, we would have 0 observations, so that we wouldn't even be able to do the analysis in that case.
You're
so
back.
Thanks very much, Dor. Did someone else want to come in there?
No, that was just me congratulating you on finding your video function.
I told you I couldn't multifunction or multitask. So unplug the USB wire, sorts it out for you, for anyone interested. Okay, so we have another question in from Anna Visser. wondering if you looked at the purchasing power of the disposable income levels in Ireland and Northern Ireland, and any thoughts on implications for deprivation in either Ireland or Northern Ireland?
I can take that. So we actually did look, one of our robustness checks was to adjust all incomes for purchasing power parity and rerun the analysis. We actually find pretty similar results, which you may or may not be surprised about. So it's not primarily differences in income levels that are driving our results, was what we took away from that. I'm not sure, we haven't looked at deprivation or anything like that. It's actually really hard to simulate changes to deprivation because it's not only about incomes, it's about price levels as well. We could have done this analysis for poverty rates as well. I think we did try it, but the issue with income poverty rates is that they're very sensitive to the poverty line. So you can get results that are quite hard to interpret when you with a small change to a tax or welfare parameter that just puts an awful lot of people either above or below the poverty line. So we omitted that from the analysis. Deprivation is a lot harder to model. I think we might be working a bit more on that next year. So the short answer is no, we haven't looked at deprivation.
So thank you for that. So I'm going to combine the next two questions. One of them, which was from Sean O'Connor, but it's looking at I suppose geographic or inequalities due to geographic contributing factors. So it could be access to transport, public transport, or I suppose pricing could vary between urban and rural, that type of thing. So if anybody wishes to discuss around that.
I can go with this. So we haven't done yet for this report, but there is the possibility to analyze the difference for regions in Ireland, but not for sub-regions in Northern Ireland, just this.
And that again is down to sample sizes. So we can probably split Ireland into regions, but we probably can't do the same for Northern Ireland. But I think that would be interesting to do, and it's something we should think about.
Yeah, but we really can't because the data set doesn't allow us to split Northern Ireland in sub-regions.
Okay, so if we want, I might merge the next two questions. They're covering the benefit system. So somebody is asking about whether there's further breakdown observed between primary and secondary benefits in the two jurisdictions. And also, I think related to this, Noel Cahill is asking whether there are particular benefits driving the differences. So I think are there particular benefits in either system that make a big impact on inequality?
So in terms of primary versus secondary benefits, we didn't split this out. So we focused on means tested versus non-means tested. We did look into which particular benefits were driving it. So in Northern Ireland, benefits like the child tax credit, the working families tax credit, whatever the equivalent of the working families payment, that was also a big contributor. Housing benefits as well, and to a lesser extent than universal credit and employment support assistance, I think it's called. Those were the main ones that were contributing to the differences with Ireland.
Thank you very much for that. So we have a question now on, I think this possibly relates, we've covered it in previous research, but looking at cross-border workers, and is there anything outlining the difference in those living in Northern Ireland and working in Northern Ireland versus those crossing the border for a place of work? Is there anything specific in this? I know Seamus McGuinness and colleagues had the previous research on this, so I'm not sure it's whether you've looked at that.
There's nothing on that in our research, so I'd have to defer to Seamus and colleagues for an answer to that. I think it's a really interesting question, and I think it makes the case for having a harmonised tax benefit model for the island of Ireland, where we can actually, because we know that there are plenty of people who live in the Republic and work over the border and vice versa. And it's important to account for the different tax schedules that they're facing and living standards. So there's a lot of work going on in the international community on spatial microsimulation, where there's a model for a region that isn't just a country. It might be a collection of countries that where there is significant mobility. But maybe that's something we can talk about further in the panel.
Good. So I have a very specific question now from Valerie Russelin from SkillNet Ireland. You have, she quotes one of your conclusions saying, well, she's asking you to elaborate on the conclusion that shared trends in upskilling may substantially affect income inequality in both jurisdictions in the future. Do you want to talk a little bit around that? What's driving?
Yeah, I suppose the message from this, and it's not just from this, so lots of previous literature on this topic, as the education level in a country increases, the employment level also increases, right? So there are fewer people out of work because the employment rate of high-skilled people is higher than the employment rate of low-skilled people. So it's kind of mechanical. And when you have a higher employment rate, you tend to have lower income inequality because there are fewer people with no earnings, right? So fewer households with no earners in them. So just mechanically, it decreases income inequality when you have a higher educated population. The other side of that is if you have an aging population, you tend to have more people with no earnings. So more households where there are zero earnings, and that can have the opposite effect. So that increases income inequality. And those are the two trends that we're facing at the moment. So it's unclear which one of those is going to dominate.
Very good. So I think the next is more a comment. It's highlighting that certain income is higher in the Republic and costs may be lower in the North. But I think, I suppose what this research shows is how that plays out in the big scheme of things, because just comparing incomes doesn't tell you the whole story. And I think that's what the point is making. There's also Laura McCusker asking about the North-South, like cross-border workers. And I think I'll try and find the link to that report that we mentioned and put it in the chat or here so you can find it more easily. And then just the last question I have on my list, just thinking of the extent of economic inactivity in Northern Ireland and its impact, is there potential to look at working inequality?
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, Dora, do you want to answer that? Because we kind of do that in the market income decomposition.
We do, right? So when we look at demographics, so demographics is one thing, but then we also take into account the employment status. So those who are working, so employees, self-employed, and farmers, those in education, and those not working. So technically, those not working would be those that are inactive as well. So we do take that into account. It is already accounted for when we do the swap of market incomes. I don't know if was there anything else to add, or is that enough? Maybe you can follow up.
Implicitly in there, and comes out not particularly important in the grand scheme of things.
So I see somebody has put up very kindly the link to the report, which I am just, again, I can't multitask. It's not coming up. I'm going to put in a chat in a second, in the chat so everyone can link to it. So Brendan O'Leary asks, he realizes you don't have the data for this, but would you care to speculate on the impact of retrospective public pension schemes on income inequality in the two jurisdictions? Not an easy question for a Friday afternoon.
So, I mean, the only thing we can say, I suppose, if you look at the level of kind of the state pension in Ireland and Northern Ireland, it's relatively more generous in Ireland. Okay, so that's going to give relatively higher income to people with no earnings, or people with who have on average lower earnings in Ireland than in Northern Ireland. So that it probably does contribute, but it's really hard to model whether that it makes a big difference in the grand scheme of things. So that's sort of a partial answer.
So I think Thanks for that, Karina. I don't have any additional questions at this stage. So we're going to move on now to our panel session. But if some additional questions come at the end, we may be able to take them. So the plan at this stage is we have invited a few external colleagues to help us discuss the report. So I'm joined by Professor John Fitzgerald, who's adjunct professor at Trinity College Dublin and formerly of ESRI, Dr. Lisa Wilson, who's senior economist at the Nevin Economic Research Institute based in Dublin, and Daria Popova, senior research fellow at the University of Essex and has experience in this from the UKMOD side. So the people familiar with the ESRI's work on Switch, University of Essex do similar work in the UK. So I'm going to few questions to throw out. I might come to you all. So if I might start with you, John, you have, well, a long research record across a lot of topics, including work on upskilling and education in Ireland. This research indicates that increasing education in Northern Ireland would reduce income inequality, giving an uplift from employment and such like. Do you think that's upskilling is likely to happen in Northern Ireland in the near term? And if not, what do you think are the barriers to that not happening?
All right. First of all, you could have summed me up by saying I'm elderly. In terms of your question, it would be interesting, I think you probably have the data, to model what the wage distribution would be in Northern Ireland if you had the Republic of Ireland's educational attainment. Because the work which Seamus McGuinness has done, which Vanni Barua has done, has pointed to a huge problem in Northern Ireland with the educational system and the outmigration of immigrants. So it'd be interesting how my suspicion is interacting with the tax and welfare system based on your analysis that it would make Northern Ireland much more unequal. That the reason why the Republic is similar to the North is on the tax system. We tax much more heavily people in high incomes. So you'd want to change Northern Ireland. So I think education is very important, but it actually, if everybody has the same education, then that narrows the distribution of market income and narrows the distribution of after-tax income, given the welfare system. The other thing which is really striking in what you show, one of the many striking things in this very valuable study, is how high up the income distribution welfare payments go in the North. And it's interesting, the UK has similar distribution of market income to the Republic, but there's a very big difference in the disposable income. But when you go to Northern Ireland with the UK system, it has the same as the Republic. And it highlights issues. And I think it's interesting to look at, it would be interesting to go on and look at the regional distribution. It's sort of what's affecting distribution of income within the UK, but that's not part of your mission. But the final implication of this for policy is, and the Fiscal Commission in Northern Ireland said Northern Ireland could, like Scotland, take responsibility for the income tax system. It could redefine it. Now, there are other dangers, which I won't go into, which the Fiscal Commission points to on that. But if you reform the Northern Ireland educational system, it'll take a long time, 20 years before it have an impact, but you'd probably want a different income tax system like the Republic if you wanted to keep the Gini coefficient, disposable income, the same. The other thing is that the reason why the welfare payments go so high up the distribution in Northern Ireland is because there's a bloody massive transfer from central government to London, which allows that to happen. But it'd be interesting to do a counterfactual. Given the cost of the welfare system in the North and given the tax system, Northern Ireland could potentially redesign its tax and welfare system, which could give a much bigger reduction in the Gini coefficient? And what would you do in the north to achieve more in terms of redistributing income? But I think that, and the final thing is, there are two papers by Alan Barrett, the director of the ESRI, on returned immigrants and the returns to returning immigrants. With 50% of the Irish workforce returned with third level education, with a third of those with third level education returned immigrants, and with that third earning 10% more because they're returned immigrants. That's different from Northern Ireland, where graduates emigrate and never come back to Northern Ireland. And if you had information in your data set, like if you could send everybody on work in Northern Ireland, a third of the graduates in Northern Ireland on work experience abroad for a year and bring them, and then make sure they came back, would that change things? So I think the differences between the two jurisdictions, it's interesting to look at the differences in education attainment. A long answer, sorry, but then I'm elderly.
Doesn't hold you back, John. And I would never call you elderly. We're all moving up along that line. So I'm going to open that question maybe to our other panelists, whether Lisa or Daria, if you feel you want to answer or draw on any topics there. And
yeah, I'll come in just briefly. Because yeah, I think the central thing on reading the paper was how much more the tax system does in the Republic of Ireland and how much more the benefit system does in Northern Ireland in driving income inequality. And I suppose on reading it, many times I was thinking how much more bang for buck people in Northern Ireland get from the tax and benefit system compared to those in the Republic of Ireland. Such extensively higher tax payments in the Republic for a benefit system that's just delivering, you know, about the same or less, give or take. So, but I think, and I think the central thing then comes to how much the wage distribution actually is so crucial to this story. And the inequalities, because I don't think that what I just said is actually true right across the board. So much of the tax take is coming from those two top deciles in the Republic of Ireland. It's driven by the extent of wage inequality right at the very top, by when you look at the gender breakdown of this, very highly paid top earning males in particular sectors, which is, you know, kind of skewing this story. But going back then to the point, John, that you were trying to make about the work of the Fiscal Commission, because I do think then what your research today, Karina, and others have shown is that when you look at where the tax take is coming in Northern Ireland and where the, you know, how much the benefit system is coming right up the income distribution, and basically the net contributors to the tax and benefit system being the top two deciles in Northern Ireland, is how narrow the income tax base in Northern Ireland really is. And that really links into the work that we've done in the Fiscal Commission to be able to show that. And the biggest impact on that was the increase in the personal tax allowance in the UK, which just took whole swathes of income taxpayers in Northern Ireland out of the income tax system and has really narrowed over it, and it's still going on, narrowed the income tax base in Northern Ireland. So I support John's calls to kind of how this can be reviewed, and kind of any kind of ongoing kind of discussions about the devolution of income taxation in Northern Ireland really needs to take those things into consideration.
Well, thank you, Lisa. I don't see anyone else's mic off, so I might proceed. I have another question actually for you, Lisa, on about wage structure this time. You know, it's more unequal in Ireland than in Northern Ireland, and you've done work on that from a gender perspective. Do you want to share some of your findings that are relevant to this work? You know, is selection into work a big driver of the differences, and what role productivity plays?
Yeah, I do think selection into work is part of the picture, but I do think it's more that productivity picture, and I do think it's more related to that earnings distribution. So what my research had shown, kind of looking at both places separately, really is what it was doing, was the earnings distributions in both places are really different. In Northern Ireland, the gap is kind of coming from the bottom and the top, but not like what we tend to see in other places. Women at the bottom and the top of the distribution earn more than men in Northern Ireland, and that's kind of contrary to what we see in other places. Whereas in the Republic, as you look across the distribution, the gaps are there across the distribution, but it's right at the very top of the wage structure, where it's what is driving a lot of this. So the gap explodes right at the top. And I think you can link this to your taxation data then. And the story of where the taxation is coming right at the very top of the income distribution. And it kind of links back in. So I think the sectoral composition of Northern Ireland, but also the within sectoral composition of earnings is really crucial to kind of understanding this. It's both the sectoral composition differences between the North and South, but also the within returns to that, and the returns to education, going back to that, the returns to education in the Republic are so much greater, irrespective of, differences in education. What you get for having an education in the Republic of Ireland is just so much greater than what it is in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, it's so close, and the difference is so much. So is there any, John or Daria, or even any of the authors, do you want to chip in? Surprising John doesn't want to talk about education. So I have a methodological question, Daria, that I might put to you. So Karina spent a good chunk of the presentation, I suppose, outlining the methodology of how she went about trying to compare the systems and taking the structure from one country and putting it into the system of the other. And you have experience with microsimulation models and UKMOD and the like. Could you maybe talk to us about best practices and methods in the literature on how to do this? And I'm not asking you to write a scorecard or a report card right now, but I suppose it's to what are the challenges, or what are researchers out there doing to try and effectively do these types of cross-country comparisons, and then maybe the case for this harmonized model between UK and Ireland.
Yeah, thank you very much. So first of all, I want to say that this report is very valuable, and it sort of sheds light on this complex interplay between different factors explaining income inequality, the labor market, the demographic structure, demographic composition of the population, and the impact of the tax benefit system. This report uses quite an interesting and innovative methodology of a policy swap. So it basically allows you to measure the impact of a borrowed policy on different populations and income distributions. So that's the essence of this method, and it's done using microsimulation model. So in this case, that's the Irish model, and UKMOD, which contains the models for 4 UK nations. One of them is Northern Ireland. So these two models, the authors talk about difficulties in making this type of exercise. What I want to emphasize is that basically these models, they're built on the EuroMOD platform, and to some extent, they're already harmonized for this type of cross-country comparisons. So they are part of this multi-country framework, and that's why they have some level of comparability already. Plus, UK and Ireland, they belong to similar welfare state models, and it means that many policies are similar in terms of their design. So, for instance, there is this focus on inclusive benefits. So, swapping these types of elements might be easier between Ireland and the UK than any other European nation. Well, one obvious technical difficulty is that UKMOD is no longer part of this general EuroMOD model, but we have tried to maintain comparability with this model, and I think this allows for effective analysis between these two jurisdictions, which is done in this report. So given that the level of harmonization in these models is quite high, well, there are still some technical limitations. But what I feel is more important here is the main difficulty. It's not just technical issues in carrying out this exercise. The real challenge lies in making this sort of policy swaps realistically useful in a different policy context. Well, taking the current report aside, so this report does a great job explaining the drivers of income inequality across the two regions. But when it comes to swapping entire tax benefit systems, that may not always be practical or realistic, because in each welfare state there are these strong elements of power dependency in terms of how this tax systems and benefit systems developed, and they're shaped by many factors. There are many embedded interests. So overhauling the systems completely may not be realistic. But one direction for future research, which I think is quite fruitful, is focusing on specific elements. So this report provides a general picture of drivers of income inequality. So my suggestion would be to look at specific programs or types of benefits that might be responsible for these differences. So for instance, the focus on child allowances or unemployment benefits and swapping this from one country to another. So taking, for instance, universal credit in the UK, so it seems to be quite efficient. What the question we would ask is, what if we were to introduce a similar system in Ireland, and so on. So that's what I think would be interesting to look at in the future. And well, another substantive issue in implementing this policy swaps and these types of exercise is basically accounting for second order effects, such as differential take-up of benefits, the effect of this policy changes on work incentives, economic behavior, and even demographic trends, demographic changes. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Very, very comprehensive answer. And yes, it was interesting about the universal credit. I don't know if you guys have contemplated any of that, Darina or Dora, but certainly I know it's a controversial benefit measure, or at least it has lots of opposition. One of the things I wanted to widen out the discussion, we spent a lot of talk about inequality. Of course, that's the whole focus of the report. We're going to have an election here, possibly in the next 6 weeks or so, based on some of the Green Party leaders has named a date, so maybe that will come soon. And you know, we've had research in ESRI before, which has talked about you know, that the government should focus on reducing inequality. It remains to be seen to what extent that will be in this forthcoming election. But in survey research, we find that, you know, 4 out of 5 people see this as a good thing. But the research shows that, you know, we haven't reduced inequality to any great extent, or, you know, it's slightly decreased in Ireland. So it sort of proof is in the pudding. It's not that much of a political priority. You know, should it be, or is it logical that, you know, governments focus on specific things such as housing or education, and you is that where policy should be? Or if you focus on inequality, will that spread out and deal with other issues, like lift all boats? So, John, I sense with your microphone off, you might want to, if I'm not putting you on the spot.
No, I happy to do so. But actually, Ireland inequality in disposable income has fallen, like the work by Baran, I think Karina, you were involved, over the last 50 years, that governments have consistently, and now Ireland would be have the 8th lowest Gini within the EU, and with only of the original members, only Belgium and is it Finland are lower than Ireland. So it has been a political priority for 50 years, and you see the proof is in the pudding. One other question I have is in 2021, revenue from PRSI and income tax to the Republic was 40 billion. Transfers were 30 billion. What's the figure for Northern Ireland? Because I'm sure it is dramatically different in Northern Ireland, and that is the benefit to Northern Ireland of the transfers from central government in London. I'm interested in examples of other countries where, if you do for the Brandenburg region of Germany, do this work and compare that to the German, and it's how redistribution happens between regions and then within regions, and looking at Northern Ireland as a region within the UK, how much of it, the redistribution, is happening from central government and how much is happening within Northern Ireland is, I think, an issue. But the budget, like, one can talk about changing the tax and benefit systems in the north and the south, but you've got to think of the budget. In Northern Ireland, there's a huge budget relative to the Republic because of the transfer from London. Could they make a better use of that in terms of redistributing income?
Very good. Karina, Dora, do you want to? Michaela? Lisa, when your mic is on, I suggest there's an answer.
Yeah, like whether or not, a country, I think the research from kind of Brian Nolan and others, and kind of from the ESRI over a long period of time, and kind of the Gini project back, I think, ended 2015, showed there's clear reasons why, as a society, we should be concerned about high levels of income inequality. It's, it has a negative impact on a whole host of societal outcomes. I think the biggest issue with a lot of those studies, though, at the time, wasn't kind of thinking back to the 2011 Occupy movement, so on, was there was never a discussion or a clarity around, well, what is the optimum level of income inequality then? And I think that's a really interesting place to have the debate, not whether or not we should, care about this as an issue. Of course, the society should care about, issues of fairness and so on. That's what societies are built on, and also then the empirical evidence shows that it has harmful consequences for health and social outcomes. But the extent, what level income inequality should be is kind of, I suppose, a conversation and a part of that debate that hasn't really finished out. Kind of speaking from a Northern Ireland point of view, and kind of a redistribution reason to be concerned about income inequality. How much is this on the agenda in Northern Ireland? The word poverty never made it into the recently published programme for government, which suggests to you how far up the policy agenda income inequality is. Never mind issues of low level living standards and kind of those at the depths. So that's just kind of give a bit of a Northern Ireland context.
Thanks for that. I just remind our online participants, the Q&A session option is still open there if anyone wants to put in a question. So maybe thinking about wrapping up, can
I just ask,
whoever?
Can I ask Michele just to come in on the fairness issue that Lisa raised, because we were having a really interesting discussion about this just before the panel.
Yeah, no, yes, the discussion that we actually had before the panel was how inequality can perceived fair or unfair. So the general idea is that not all the types of inequality are perceived fair or unfair. And sometimes also it's how you want to reduce inequality. Different policies are perceived more fairer than others. So we know that people in general, for example, prefer in-kind transfer than prefer to give other people in-kind transfer than cash transfer. Both can reduce inequality, but you understand that the policy instrument and the design of it completely change it. I think that writing a report that disentangle the effect of inequality in two countries can also help understand why some people are more in favor of redistribution than others, depending on the two jurisdictions. That's all.
It's very interesting. And I think, Karina, you said at the start, I suppose that your analysis is on, I suppose, money transfer policy or benefit system and money. There's a lot that goes on in society that I suppose contributes to society that is not in the market economy, so to speak, and whether that's with people in need or in general. So making these comparisons across countries or jurisdictions is difficult. And I suppose the question is, you know, should we be doing this more? Like we were talking about Ireland, Northern Ireland, you know, and John was referring to the transfers essentially from, you know, London or UK to Northern Ireland. But within the European system, should we be comparing countries like similar regions? There's lots of cross-border movement within Europe, you know, the lowland countries and such like. Should we be doing this, expanding this work out and learning from what's going on elsewhere and how different countries with sort of very close associations, how they manage their systems? Because, you know, two levels of rules on different sides of a line can have good or negative impacts. So is there scope for more research there on, or have you ambitions, or, and this is to everyone on the call, to maybe where the future should lie in this kind of work?
I mean, we didn't really think about future ambitions because we just wanted to get the report out at this point. But I mean, I'm personally learning so much from this discussion, and I think it's really highlighting any future research that could be done. So Karina mentioned one of a joint tax benefit system on the island. I haven't looked at those joint tax benefit systems in continental Europe, but we can definitely look into that. There was a discussion, so Karina and I talked about that earlier a few days ago, about these cross-border movements. I'm from Croatia, where a lot of Croatians go to either Slovenia or even to Austria to work, but then they live in Croatia. So that is happening all over Europe, and that is kind of labor movement is part of the European project. But I don't think we have looked at this at all within the tax benefit system. So that's definitely a direction to go towards. Yeah.
And although it's not cross-comparative, kind of linking back to kind of John's suggestion to compare across the UK, I think there's comparing across the island of Ireland regionally is a really interesting area of study. Like, I'm a cross-border worker, work in Belfast, live in Donegal. And despite the findings of this research, I know where I would rather get benefits if I was unemployed, or if, you know, because I would rather be in the Republic of Ireland because of the level. Back to that kind of point about, you know, people like cash income from the benefit system, and the level just being higher, and kind of the yeah. So I think there's a real but also I'm saying that living in Donegal, because the cost of living in Donegal is substantially different from the cost of living in Belfast or Dublin, you know. So there's a real kind of regionality to all of this that is completely missed whenever you're kind of looking, and this is like a very important first step. And just in case I kind of forget to say, because it kind of links into the discussion, John, that you had, John Curtis, this is, and the kind of ongoing work. Myself and Barra Rowntree are working currently on an all-island poverty study, kind of looking at trends in poverty. And where we can, kind of deprivation, trends in deprivation, although it's very difficult to do the deprivation comparisons, north and south, and kind of developing an all-island poverty measure. So that will hopefully be coming out in the next few months. But it's, you know, it's another kind of interesting kind of lens that whenever I was reading this, how then when you look then this whole distribution picture, because we've just obviously been looking at the bottom of the distribution, you know, this kind of is really insightful for me in kind of developing out that paper.
Two things from the discussion. I think this paper is interesting because you're comparing the Republic with a region within the UK. It'd be interesting if there are studies done for other countries, and do they differentiate the welfare system by region or the tax system by region, and what does that do in terms of redistribution? Now, like welfare systems, you've got generally you can't shop around for welfare systems. Ireland was different in 1990, and East Germans discovered that you could come and sign on for unemployment assistance in Ireland within 2 weeks. So there were a few thousand East Germans spent a year in Ireland learning English, paid for by the Irish state. And the Department of Social Welfare published the numbers. But because we were receiving a lot of money in structural funds from the German taxpayer, they were quite prepared to pay a few Germans to learn English. But so the tax system, people can move around, but welfare systems are local. And whether there's any differentiation elsewhere, which can narrow the income distribution. Just one other thing in terms of research like this can have significant impacts on policy. There's a 1987 paper by Patrick Honohan and Ian Irvine, which showed that the income tax system was extremely inefficient. There was huge dead weight. It was exceptionally high tax rates at the bottom, at the top, and it was inefficient. We redesigned the tax system as a result of that research, and the goose doesn't hiss too much at the top of the distribution of the Republic from paying the tax. There's very little objection from people on high incomes to paying their tax. They may try and avoid it, but so designing your tax and welfare system can be important in terms of the efficiency of how you meet your objective, and particularly in terms of poverty. I'm really interested in that. And the research, I think, by the ESRI showing an increase in number of children in poverty, was it last year? Suggestions of having a separate child payment to welfare beneficiaries might be so that this research, my immediate question is, how can we improve policy in the light of what you've discovered? Karina, Dora, and Michelle.
Thanks, John. I might just make two observations based on various points by the panel. So the regional tax and welfare system idea is really, really interesting. And initially we did try to look at this, and then we sort of abandoned because it all got a bit confused and cluttered. But I do think we will probably approach this again in the future, looking at how, at least within Ireland, regional inequality is different. Because I suspect that, you know, outside of Dublin, the regions might look a bit more like Northern Ireland, right? In terms of wage inequality, at least, for example. So that is something that we definitely do want to look at. The other thing is, like, part of, I suppose, what we're finding in terms of the welfare system being relatively more generous in Northern Ireland, is the fact that for most instruments in the tax benefit system, they're the same all over the UK. So there's very little regional difference. And because income levels are on average lower in Northern Ireland, then it just appears much more generous. And that's getting at, John, what you were saying about this transfer from London. And the other point, so Lisa, you mentioned was it the personal tax allowance was increased to, and that really narrowed the tax base in Northern Ireland. I think we're sort of going the same way here as well. You know, so this research dates from the data is from 2019. I think if you looked at more recent data, the picture would have changed a bit. The last couple of budgets have been really relatively more generous to high income earners than to low income earners. There've been successive real tax cuts over the last couple of years, whereas welfare hasn't actually kept pace with inflation on average over the last couple of years. So that's probably changed in the intervening years to some extent. So it would be interesting to do this again to see how things have changed, at least post-pandemic, with the most recent data we have.
Very interesting. Just to say there, I asked for some additional questions Paul Ginnell makes the point that which I think John has already echoed about, you know, the looking at the tax system and its role in the system that has the impact. And I think the discussion on the regional thing, I suppose and living in Donegal and versus London or Belfast and Dublin it's where do you want to live? In a sense, you may have, you know, the Dublin income and live down the country or such like, but then you spend half that extra income on getting to work and such like. So it's you may look on an analysis like this to be in a relatively good place, but the cost of that living there, it might be lower housing. And I think there's another question here that's come in about, and I'll pass this back to maybe the authors, is the impact of housing costs. We know that housing obviously is a big issue. Well, it's a big issue in both countries, but do you know if it has, to what extent it impacts inequality differently in both jurisdictions?
So we haven't been able to look at that in this research. So the kind of measure of inequality implicitly just ignores consumption and how all the costs that go along with it, including housing costs. So in that sense, it's kind of abstracting from differences in price levels and so on. So one thing we did do was try to adjust all of the incomes in Northern Ireland in our simulations for purchasing power parities, which will give an average sort of different income level. But ultimately, it doesn't really change income inequality. Okay, so it's hard to incorporate housing costs into measures of income inequality. You can incorporate them into poverty measures because you can calculate poverty measures before and after housing costs. But income inequality, you could in theory deduct housing costs to calculate a Gini coefficient of after housing cost income. We didn't have the information readily available in the survey data, so we haven't looked at that. Okay,
very good. There's another question come in that John, off the top of his head, as he has for pulling numbers, that we just wondered, did he check it beforehand? But I know from history that he just stores all this information about the amount of tax revenue or social what do you call it, PRSI revenue versus the cost of benefits. There's a question coming in that's asking, can the Switch or UKMOD models give the overall expenditure and revenue figures? To answer that question, you know, how much of the net, what's the difference coming from London? I suspect maybe it can give you back of the envelope figure, but I don't know that we want to rely on it. And therefore, I see John, but if you want to come in.
I don't know that I have it in my spreadsheet, but maybe Lisa could answer it.
Sorry, I was just typing there, so I actually missed your question. So you can repeat it again, I'll give it a go, but sorry.
Well, John mentioned before about the difference between the revenue, the cost of the benefit system versus the revenue in terms of social insurance taxes for the Republic, and, you know, netting that off from the net contribution from London. So I think there was a question from one of the audience asking whether the models can help answer this. I'm not sure these models are set up to do that, but whether that number is there, I don't know.
I don't think we have that number, no.
So the Switch and UKMOD models can give those numbers, right?
Yeah.
So because they're based on representative survey data, so you have a representative sample of the population, you simulate their tax and welfare. So, you know, for all of the things that we model, right, so which is basically the majority of the direct tax system and the welfare system, if you gross that up using the survey weights, it tells you how much all of this is going to cost the exchequer. You have to trust the survey data, right, which is one sort of major drawback. Switch is reweighted to hit control totals provided by Department of Social Protection and Revenue. So it should be representative of the distribution of income, the number of welfare recipients and so on. I'm not sure about UKMOD, Daria. Do you know if the data is reweighted at all to hit administrative numbers?
No, it's not reweighted, but yeah, so it's comparable. course.
Yeah, they are extensively validated, these
On the
models,
screen.
to make sure they're doing a reasonable job of simulating the actual number of people paying tax, receiving welfare, and the aggregate amount of expenditure. So you could pull those numbers out of the models, that would work. And you could also pull the numbers out for how much it would cost to change the tax benefit system.
You can also, I was just quoting the national accounts numbers for the total revenue from income tax and PRSI, and then the national accounts number for transfer payments in the Republic. If you gave me another 5 minutes, I'd find it for Northern Ireland, but we don't have 5 minutes.
Okay, I think thanks for that. So maybe at this stage then we might wrap up. We're coming up to the end of time anyway. So I'd like to thank our participants for joining today, and it was great to have so many people online. Thank our panelists, John, Lisa, and Daria, for your time and studying up the report and giving your comments, and then also to our authors, Karina, Dora, and Michaela. And again, just to say thank you to the Shared Island Unit for contributing funding to this research. I think the purpose of it is to have these kind of discussions and inform debate, at least put some, I suppose, quality information and data into that discussion space. So with that, I'll wrap up, and thank you very much.
Thanks to all. Thanks for coming.